Okay.
Okay, so let me confirm, let's find out that our members are online. So let me go down the list here. I'll call your name and just shout out that you're here. Donald Green? No. Lou Bassano?
Coming on. He's coming on.
Okay. Susan Matloff? I'm just going through the list of members. Mary Russell? Bill Gardner?
Here.
Yeah. Can't see you, Bill.
Here.
I don't know why.
Peter's here. Peter Hale?
There we go.
He's coming. He said he's coming on. He's not on yet.
Bill Sherman, are you on? No. And Peter Kahn, you're on?
Yes.
And
Lou is on.
Lou's on? Okay, so we're just missing, who are you expecting?
Peter Halle's coming on.
He's on now.
I'm on, yeah.
Oh, good.
We just can't see you.
Oh. How about
There
that?
you
Okay, there you are. Our esteemed guest is here.
Great.
Which we'll introduce in a minute, Roberto Santa Maria. So you're here. Are there any members of the public here who would like to let me know who they are?
Yes, my name is Ronald Berman.
Okay, Ronald Berman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Anyone else? Okay, so let's see, we have Peter, two Peters, Kathy, Bill, myself and Lou, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I think we have a quorum right now.
We have 7 because I'm listed as the town host.
Why am I not on the video?
You need to put it on.
I don't know.
Lou, press stop video or start video, if you can, at the bottom lower
There
left.
you are. There you are.
There you
Okay.
go.
Great
So let me
picture.
read the script, folks. Good morning. This open meeting of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature public comment if Ronald Berman would like to speak at some point. For this meeting, ACNVT is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda, but before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for the effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meetings. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. In the meantime, remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. And if members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged and speak through the chair. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Okay, so I went through the script as is the case at every meeting that, as you all know, if you've attended any of the other virtual meetings that this town has had, we all go through the same thing. The first item, we're going to seek approval of this agenda. And so if we have a motion for that, Kathy sent out the agenda.
I move we approve.
Okay, all in favor, just raise your hands. I'll see your hands raised and I'll know we have enough. Yep. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Next item, we have the minutes. Kathy sent out a few copies of versions of it, but the last one she sent is the one we're looking at now. Anyone have any comments about the meeting, the minutes of the last meeting?
Move their approval.
Okay, and there is a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
You see all your hands? Okay. Could you wait 1 second? There's one piece of paper I need to, before I introduce Roberto, there's one piece of paper I want to get. I'll be right back in 1 second.
Now we have a good view of the chair of the meeting.
So that's the definition of chair.
Exactly. Exactly.
Somebody should get a screenshot.
So, Roberto, as most of you have seen, if you've seen any of the select board meetings, has played a very important role. In fact, it is my view that Roberto, who is the medical director for the town of Nantucket, he probably has the most difficult job on the island these days. And we are delighted and thrilled that you were able to spend a few minutes with us this morning talking about the issues that you're dealing with and the questions that we may have. Because we know the pressure you're under from every source, whether it's the business folks, the visitors, select board, whatever. But let me mention who we are, Roberto. So we are the non-voting taxpayers. So in our view, we are of critical importance to the island's success, since we provide the lion's share of total funding of the town's budget. Likely, the bulk of the donations to the numerous nonprofit organizations on the island, a huge chunk of the business receipts of retail stores, restaurants, island construction companies, and vendors of every type servicing the island's needs. And like what we do at this committee, we try to use our expertise and experience to assist the town's managers on various issues and initiatives with the town is dealing. And we resent it sometimes when town officials lump us in with short-term renters, day trippers, and the like. So that was my little talk about what we really are, as most of us spend probably as much time on the island as we do at our other residence. And we may have a bigger investment in Nantucket than in some of the other places where we may be. But we really have the interests of Nantucket at heart. So now we're going to ask you to talk to us a little bit about where we are in the stage of the pandemic. I started out thinking about this, and the reason I ran out, I wrote this question, which could be part of what you start talking about when you're talking about the pressures that you are dealing with each day. My question was, how do you control the risk of pandemic with such a considerable inflow of weekly renters and day trippers? And in talking with one of the other members, we were talking the other day and saying, could the medical department ban such folks from visiting the island with an emergency order that exceeded the governor's guidelines? I think we probably started the season that way, where we had some more stringent requirements than the state did. But So those are the kind of things that we've been thinking about, you know, before we return to Nantucket from wherever we might be. Most of us were a little upset when we heard town managers saying, we don't want all you seasonal types coming. We were very offended by that. Now that we've been on here for the last few months, we're saying, we're with you. Let's keep those day trippers away if they're going to bring, you know, virus and issues like that to our island. So we know it's a very delicate issue that the town is facing, and you're right at the heart of it. So I'll stop talking. Roberto, you're on.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. I'll go ahead and jump right in with the questions there. One of the biggest, we actually looked into closing parts of the harbor and closing some of the, preventing some of the boats that were coming in. And as we were looking and speaking with our council, and we were speaking with the Attorney General's office, one of the biggest issues that we were running into was actually the federal waters between Nantucket and the mainland and every other island around, since we're basically jutting all the way east from the United States. So in order for that area, those waters just around Nantucket to be closed, we would need a federal order. It's not even just the governor's order to close those waters. We were really blown away. We were talking about, you know, the steamship and the High Line coming in from Hyannis and New Bedford for Sea Streak and groups like that. And when it really came down to it, there's a 20-mile stretch that they pass that is not regulated by the state of Massachusetts. So we would need approval from all three governmental entities to limit boat traffic. They would have to do it voluntarily. Luckily, High Line did. They cut their capacity to 50%, and they reduced a lot of their trips when we were in the height of the spike in this past spring, and so did Steamship. So they did it voluntarily, and they helped tremendously. But it was really shocking to find that an outright ban would be illegal. Is really the best way to say it, is just downright illegal. So we were blown away by that. However, in the orders that we were doing, because there was the state of emergency that was declared due to the outbreak, we were able to issue local emergency orders. And one of the things that we've been really lucky to do is, as we're seeing our trends here, as I'm looking at the trends in the state and in the rest of the country, one of the things that I've been seeing as a trained epidemiologist, I was looking at where we are in the epidemic curve, how far we're moving, and where the logarithmic growth is happening. So our orders, all of our emergency orders, have actually been in lockstep with what the governor was eventually did, but we were always about a week or two ahead. We were really pioneering a lot of the choices. So when we issued the shelter at home order, that was 4 days ahead of the governor, before the governor even started discussing his. So Nantucket has been really at the forefront of some of the policy here. Unfortunately, because this is so new to everyone, nobody has sat through a major global pandemic in over 100 years, that the playbook is very different. You know, when the 1918 flu was happening, they were still bloodletting. They still thought that the flu was caused by evil spirits. So it was definitely a different time. And now in the era of internet, science, and social media, there has been two bulbs of this that have been coming out. There is the science that has to grow as quick as it can, and we're trying to make policy to keep up with that, but sometimes the science changes so quickly. And then the other bulb of this is the misinformation and panic that we're seeing on social media. It is very easy for people to trust those they know before they trust what their government is saying. So it turned, a lot of the work that we've been doing has been centered around education. A really important portion of what we're doing is what we were doing is creating that delicate balance. You may have seen, I believe it was one of the New York Times article that said the hammer and the anvil was the name of the article, I believe, where it was learning to balance the economy while still having to balance public health, and where does enforcement lie between the two. So we've been trying to focus as much as we can on education while still having, as Roosevelt said, the big stick. So it's a really important part of what we do, and luckily we haven't had to, use the big stick, but unfortunately we do sometimes have to walk and carry that with us. And so we've received criticism on both sides of we're not enforcing enough, or why are we enforcing so much? But the proof is in the numbers. We have the lowest infection rate per capita, the standardized incidence in the state. The Nantucket has 43 cases as of yesterday, in comparison to about 70 in Dukes County, so almost double. And then the next county up is actually Franklin County, which has over 400 cases. So that's already 10 times what we have. So Nantucket has done a phenomenal job. And if you look outside, we've seen that we still have a pretty busy summer. It has been very difficult to balance a lot of the economy. And we really thank you, actually, very much so, the committee, non-voting taxpayers and the non-voting taxpayers in general on the island here, because you have really been integral in keeping things like the hospital running, PassCon running, the Athenaeum, a lot of these, the Dreamland and the Whaling Museum have all talked about how their donors have been really understanding this year about just how COVID has affected everyone and everything around the world. And it's been phenomenal. It's truly a partnership that we've been seeing here. And I personally want to thank you for that. I know I can continue and going and just start spouting information out here, but honestly, the better information comes out of a good discussion back and forth. So I would love to hear any questions that you may have.
I have some more questions, but I think we should let some of our colleagues ask some questions. So let's go. So Louis, do you have any questions you'd like to ask now?
I have a personal question. I wanted to know, now that we're moving toward Labor Day, if there are going to be any changes in some of the restrictions that are in place.
To our knowledge, we're looking at the beginning of another small spike, another bump. So unfortunately, the restrictions are coming in from the governor. Yesterday's order from the governor caught us all off guard. Actually, we found out, as the local enforcement entity, we found out at the same time that the public did when the governor released his orders at the press release yesterday. So we don't foresee lifting any orders at Labor Day yet. We need to see where we are on the curve. It looks good. We had 2 steps down in cases across the state of Massachusetts over the past 3 days, which is good. We went from about 400 cases a day on Monday to only about 300 on Friday, and we're on par to getting only around 280 or so today. And then on Nantucket, we went 6 days without any new cases. 2 cases yesterday, but those were because of the travel order, where people are getting tested before they come back. So those 2 individuals were asymptomatic. We're not worried about any spread happening on the island. So we're hoping that some of the orders can get lifted come Labor Day.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Peter Kahn.
Yes, thank you, Roberto. You're doing a great job. I've got a few questions. First, I'm not quite sure I understood what the governor's order was yesterday. I was not aware of that. Can you just tell us what that is?
Yes, so the governor's, I actually still have it written down from his press release. So the governor's order is the outdoor gatherings were cut by half. So there used to be, you were allowed to have up to 100 people at an outdoor event, be it a wedding or something. So he cut that down to 50 people.
Good.
Which makes it really difficult for something like the Dreamland's drive-in, because the drive-in was allowed to have 50 cars, and the cars can have 5 people in them. So it was very difficult. The alcohol to go is no longer allowed. So those to-go cocktails were canceled. This all comes into effect on Tuesday. So he saw that across the state, cases started upticking in comparisons to these outdoor gatherings caused by liquor sales happening at bars, and people are just taking it away. And he decided to cancel that. And food must be ordered. It can't just be pretzels, oyster crackers, things like that anymore. They have to order something off the menu if they're going to get alcohol served. And then he's added the state police to the enforcement. So before, the enforcement relied solely on the local jurisdiction, whether it's through just the health department or the health department, local police, and other inspectors. But he has actually advised the state police to also enforce. It won't be too much of an effect here on Nantucket, because we only have the 3 state police, 1 full-time and the 2 that they give us in the summer. But in areas like Boston, that's tremendous. That's a tremendous jump.
Okay. Now, someone asked or mentioned earlier the issue of could we be more stringent in our requirements in the governor than the state? And at least looking at around the country, that's been a problem. You generally can't do that. We see that in Georgia, for example. What is that the case in Massachusetts as well?
No, in Massachusetts, we actually have a form of government called a home rule. So we are a home rule state. So local jurisdictions are allowed to issue orders that can supersede the governor, as long as they are more stringent. We cannot go more lax than the state law, but we can do more stringent. We're trying not to. We feel that the governor's orders are strict enough in many cases, but we can if we have.
Lou, if you could be one, and Gary, one last question. I don't mean to hog this. On the enforcement side, we saw where there was that party, I guess, at 5 Corners, where all these students came in for a week. I'm just curious. Are you seeing, how that's a difficult thing, particularly if you don't have the state police with you to go in there? What are you seeing? How much of that are you doing? And generally, how that?
We've been more successful actually at policing some of the parties on the beaches, actually, because that's more, we have access agreements with all of those properties, and the police can just, the police, the firefighters, health department, we all patrol those on ATVs. So we've been pretty successful at being able to break up some of those parties. Unfortunately, we have over 100 miles of beaches on Nantucket, so we can't get to all of them. So we break up something like 20 parties in one day, but we see on social media the one big party at Eel Point that we missed, or the one party on Nobrier that we missed. And it's just, it becomes difficult. But the party at 5 Corners was actually very unique. It was right before the governor moved over to phase 3. It was a couple days before. And it happened to be in the district, the mask district, that the strict orders were in. And this particular business, this particular property was actually registered as a business with the town. So the mask order specifically says that we can enforce it against the business. So when the students and the people who were there refused to show IDs, things like that, and the police are a little hesitant to get involved on that, because as soon as you start dealing with belligerents, it starts escalating quickly and somebody ends up getting arrested, and that doesn't help anybody. So what we were able to do is we contacted the landlord, who was it was a business owner at that point, because it was a business transaction. And Mr. Stone was he worked very well with us, and he worked with them. He got them out. He actually killed the parties really quick. And he was trying to he rented the property to apparently a couple, which was the parents of one of the children that were there. I call them children, but they're 21, 20, 22. And he rented the house to one of the parents, and then the kids showed up with 20 of their friends. So it actually worked out very well. It was very unique. I don't foresee something like that happening again. The stars just happen to align on that one, but the rest, what we're doing as much as we can with the enforcement. My health department is only 4 people, and that includes myself. We only have 4 enforcement personnel, so we can't be all the areas, but we are doing our best.
Thank you.
How about Peter Hale? Questions?
Yeah, I guess on enforcement, what can we, people that are just roaming around without badges, do to help you? And it might just be alerting you to problem areas that either are on your radar screen or not on your radar screen, or is there a 911 type number to call when you see something and should say something?
So the easiest way to get a hold of the health department is through our health email. We have it's health@nantucket-ma.gov. So nantucketmass.gov. So what it ends up being, that email address actually goes to my entire staff. So somebody will be able to pick it up and respond immediately. Over the weekend, it's a little bit more difficult to get it. Usually it's just me working on the weekends. At that point, the phone number that can be called is actually the dispatch number. So that is 508-228-1212. And that goes to the police dispatch. But what happens is if you report something that you're seeing, report people, report a party, things like that, they actually call me and I can delegate staff to respond. So that's how after hours and weekend responses happen.
Yeah, the sort of thing, and so the question is judgmental, because we don't want you up 24 hours a day. But it's the sort of thing you go to a place like Island Kitchen for ice cream, and everything is working really well, and then a couple arrives without masks, and another couple arrives without masks, and nobody really wants to start shouting and starting an escalating problem. Is that the sort of thing you're interested in, or the best thing is just to get in your own car and leave?
It's something like Island Kitchen, for example, with the ice cream line. The best person to talk to at that moment is the manager. You can also email us so we can follow up with Patrick later. But something like that, your best bet is to respond to the manager. What we are more interested in is if you see people putting tables together at town, Queequegs, Ventuno, things like that. If they're supposed to have those tables apart, you're supposed to limit the party size to 6, and that's the governor's order. Well, when they start putting tables together and you start creating this one big 12, 13-person party, and they're all sharing drinks and they're sharing meals, that's when the cases start happening. And we have seen some cases caused by that, where they shared a meal with somebody. They shared a drink. It was actually what ended up happening. And in one case, they shared an ice cream. They shared a spoon, which was one of the ways that somebody got sick here. So that's what we're more worried about, where if you see the out of control lines, if you see an out of control gathering, that's what you should be able to call. If it's one couple or two, your best bet is to talk to the local man, the immediate manager. But if you see a group of 16 revelers walking down Main Street, none of them wearing masks, and they're getting close to those who are trying to be safe, that's information we want to hear.
Yeah, well, your message is clearly getting out, and at least I walk every day, and we're seeing people either who are wearing masks or the minute they see you and start approaching, put them on, and that's good to see.
Yes. No, it's been really great, and we have. I'm pointing over here because the box is in the corner. We have actually a box of shirts that say "Wear your mask" that we have volunteers wearing. We have there's a whole Sconset group that's been really great at wearing the "Wear Your Mask." They have a table out, giving out hand sanitizer, things like that. So the message is getting out. People like to focus on those who aren't wearing masks, but if one of the things that's really important about herd immunity, when you're talking about the mask, is basically a representation of a herd immunity. It's as long as 75 to 80% of the population are wearing it, it will interrupt chain of transmission. And what we have seen on the island is that it's working.
Thanks.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm a one-person enforcement squad because when I walk down the street, I'm always wearing my mask, and I see someone without a mask, I either point to the mask or I look at the person and I say, "Where's your mask?" You know, it probably shouldn't do that, but I do that all the time. I'm thinking of having people, you know, on our neighborhood put a sign saying this street is masks only.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Some people have been really great. We've been seeing that on, so when we saw the masks, the big mask sign that you can see from the street pop up on Marine Home Center, that's when we knew, you know, people are really paying attention.
Kathy, do you have some questions? Roberto? You're on mute now.
Yes, I do. I do have one question. I know that this isn't really in your jurisdiction per se, but the governor's order on the quarantine lists certain states that are free to come and go and other states that are not. And since that list is fluid, it keeps changing. Is it possible that they would just say it has to be Massachusetts level or better rather than picking out certain state names? And then, you know, because otherwise you have some states that are now less than Massachusetts, but they're still on the list that you can't come back and forth.
That's actually a good question. I can bring that over to Ron O'Connor, who is the state local and regional health director. So he is actually the person who writes and publishes, well, he doesn't write them all, but he publishes the daily dashboard, the daily caseload and things like that. So I can definitely get that information to him because his division is responsible for the website as well.
Right, because you must be using some certain data set, you know, whatever that data set tells you, it seems to me that would be easier than trying to change the states all the time.
Yes, so the data set that they're using is, they're using the two data sets, one from the CDC, but it's not super reliable anymore, and the other one from the Johns Hopkins Regional Coronavirus Center. So that the Hopkins group actually has separated everything out by state and everything using past 1 week metrics and 1 month metrics. So they've been really comprehensive on that. And I know that's probably the number they're relying on now more than anything.
Yeah, what Vermont does, they have a travel ban and they go down to the county level, and then you can click on the travel ban and then click on a site which shows county by county, but it's basically just Northeast because they have other rules that impact people who travel from far distances. But you can go and look at the county you're coming from and tell right away whether it is whether you have to quarantine or not quarantine or whatever, and that's pretty good. And I think they're relying on somebody else's data.
Yeah, that's excellent.
I can send you the link or whatever.
Perfect.
How do you enforce? I mean, how do you enforce it? I mean, obviously people who are willing to do it voluntarily, but you've got people coming. How do you know that somebody's not coming off plane, boat, what have you, coming from California, Georgia?
That's the part that's become really difficult for us. The state is supposed to be enforcing that at the time that the people are coming in. So theoretically, when they are getting a lot of responses, but it's that, how the Pareto rule, it's 80-20, 80% of the people are paying attention, 20% of the people, you spend most of your time dealing with that last 20% of the people. So what's happening is theoretically all the airlines are reaching out to their customers that are buying tickets saying, please check out the travel restrictions from your state or the state that you're traveling to. And they've been listing the states. I received one of those from JetBlue, actually, because my mother-in-law is coming in. So we were able to get that. So we are seeing it. Unfortunately, a lot of it is voluntary. And what we're seeing, especially, it doesn't capture people driving in. So,
I mean, unless you, it seems to be the only way you can really attack that is to do spot enforcement. And if that message gets out there that you're actually enforcing it, that may finally deal with it.
Exactly. We haven't received any of the travel forms yet. So we're still waiting from the state on that. But yes, once we get them, we can do spot. And we're actually hiring an evening person to do that. So what they're going to be doing is checking individual, just going through the list, going through the quarantines of the people who are sick, which in this case, we only have the 2 active cases, and doing spot checks on isolation.
Just as a follow-up, I have a friend from Toronto, Canada, who's actually here and was telling me that in Toronto, in Canada, public health system is actually calling people on a regular basis at their home, going to their homes. I mean, I don't know how they have the enforcement, have they staff to do it, but it's very effective.
I heard the same thing about London. I had a coworker here, sister flew out to London to visit her mother, and 2 days later, a police officer knocked on the door and just checked passport to make sure it was her.
Yeah.
Bill Gardner, do you have some questions?
I do, Gary, thank you. One main question, but first I wanted to say to Roberto, I'm sure everyone agrees, Nantucket's low numbers certainly prove you and your team have done a fabulous job.
Thank you.
I mean, it's really impressive that the island has that few people. But before I ask my question, could I ask you to repeat that email address that we can report to your office if we see some infractions? Health
Yes.
at?
It's health@nantucket-ma.gov.
Okay, thank you. My question is, I'd be curious to know, of all the issues that you face with establishing compliance with state and local guidelines, what are the biggest obstacles, the biggest problems? Is it youth parties? Is it social distancing? Is it restaurants? Who gives you the hardest time?
Twofold. The people who give me the hardest time, for lack of a way to say it, is the restaurants have been really great, but they're the ones who are being hardest hit. So it's not that they're giving me the hardest time, it's that they've been the hardest hit from all of these orders, because restaurants is your most common social gathering. And that includes, we don't have bowling alleys and things like that here, but off island, what we're hearing is those sorts of social gathering spots are being the hardest, are being hit the hardest, and being the loudest in their displeasure. But in enforcement, the people who have been the most difficult to deal with are actually the parties. The gatherings on the beaches. When we get there, of course, every party has a pooper, and it's us. We are the fun police in many cases. So it's really interesting where usually you show up and you say, party's over, people will say, they say, okay, and they start leaving. But when you're there with a police officer and they say, okay, the party's over and you have to give me all the liquor, that's when we start getting people really upset, because they're not allowed to have glass containers and they're not allowed to have open containers. So the police have to confiscate the liquor. That's when you start getting the angriness. Yeah. Usually if you just break up a party, that's pretty easy. People say, okay, and the party moves elsewhere. But when you confiscate the liquor, that's close to $1,000 sometimes. And people get really upset.
And the party is over.
And the party is over.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Now, since we have one member of the public join us, I thought I'd invite Ron, if you have a question to ask Roberto.
I'd like to follow up on Peter's question about quarantining. To the extent that during the height of the season, you have renters coming in for rental periods that are a week or two, how realistic is it to expect that they're going to quarantine for the length of time that they're here in the first place?
It wasn't realistic, and that was the issue. So the governor's order had a loophole in it that allowed people to leave the state even if they knew they were COVID positive. So we couldn't enforce any strict isolation like that, which is why the mask order was so important. When we were running into when we were bumping up to that issue, that's when we issued the mask order. So we were accused of being reactionary when we issued the mask order in June. But unfortunately, what's really hard is that we can't explain to the public sometimes why we have to make some of these orders, because HIPAA compliance doesn't let us. Some of the cases that happened that week, specifically that week, were caused by a person who was supposed to be in quarantine and didn't. So they ended up infecting 3 people in a rapid succession in just a couple days. When we issued the mask order, if you remember, we had about 2 more cases the next week, and then we were able to stop. It was able to stop the spread after that. So the mask order was difficult to pass through. It turned into kind of a political hot potato, but the proof was in the pudding there. The data showed we went into a period of another 14 days without cases. The first cases didn't start showing up until early July. So it's, to answer your question, the quarantine and isolation is the most difficult part to enforce. And unfortunately, because of the short staff, and we can't legally enforce, we can't confine somebody to their home without a court order. So it becomes more of a voluntary isolation and quarantine order. And that's where it becomes difficult.
I wonder to what extent the real estate brokerage industry on the island could be helpful.
They've been fantastic. They've been really great. They've been pushing out a lot of information to all of their renters. Everything that we pass, all of our emergency orders, they've been getting out to their clients. And in some cases, when a renter shows up, they actually have sterilized masks waiting for them in the property on the counter with a little tent, a little paper tent that says, mask orders, and with a QR code that takes them straight to the summer 2020 page on the Town of Nantucket website. So there's the whole spectrum on the island here of some realtors, unfortunately, just don't care. Others care to the point of canceling some rentals that are less than 14 days. So we've seen the whole gamut. So it's been really interesting to see it, but the real estate agencies have been really effective as well, so is the lodging community.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.
So long as they are permitting short-term rentals, and so long as they are permitting day trippers, to me, when I see the day trippers come off the ferry, lugging, whatever they might, just a small little backpack or something, I say, how can we possibly protect the island? And yet the proof so far is in the pudding, where we seem to be doing okay. I'm always horrified. I live in Brant Point, so I see everyone coming off the ferry, and there are tons of people coming off the ferry every day, especially on weekends. And I worry about our community, and so far so good. But I have a question about testing, Roberto.
Yes, sir.
And I have some relatives that are just graduating high school and going into college, and a few of them are going to, 2 of them are going to schools in Boston, and they have this 2-week quarantine because they're coming from Maryland, from Bethesda. But one of the things they told me is that their colleges, and it's not just a couple there, I heard this about colleges, and the colleges are requiring testing 2 and 3 days a week. Now, what that tells me, and what they say, is that, and some colleges even do more testing than that. Now, to me, the question is,
We lost you there, Gary.
Yeah, Gary, looks like we lost you.
Yeah.
Right as he was asking the question.
It sounds like how effective is testing in that scenario?
Well, also, how quickly can we get right now, how long is it taking the testing results to come back here in Nantucket? How quickly could we get them?
So here we're getting our results turned around in 24 to 48 hours.
Good.
So that's been really good. We've been partnering with the Broad Institute rather than using Quest, which has a backlog. So the Broad's been really great. What we have been running into with this college question, when I'll repeat it when Gary gets back on, is every 3 days, though that is very good, it is incredibly inconvenient because of the method of testing. So if you've had a test yet, you know that they basically scratch your brain with that. It looks like a mascara brush, and it's 4 inches long, and they bring it all the way back to this back of the sinus, and they swab in that fringe, that region there. The new testing that's supposed to come out in the next week or so is just the anterior nasal swab. So it just swabs only here around the bone area, and you don't have to go all the way back. So that's an easier swab, and they're expecting that to be a rapid test, so they'd be able to get the results within an hour or so. If that comes out, and if that is effective, and it's a good positive, if you don't get many false positives with that, they will be able to roll that out every 3 days, and I see that would be relatively easier. As far as its effectiveness goes, having tests every 3 days, I think, is a little onerous, honestly. You would get the same results going on a weekly test, because by the time and with the caveat that you tell the students, as soon as you show any symptom, you show up. But for an asymptomatic carrier, they can show a positive in those few, or a pre-symptomatic carrier, they won't show a positive until 4 days, 5 days after they've been exposed. So you're just spending a lot of money on that second test for no reason. What I'm more worried about as far as the colleges in Boston is more their interaction with the rest of the city, more so than their interaction within the school. It's controlling behavior is the hardest portion. And those of us, we all remember college, and controlling, when you're 18 years old and you're away from your parents for the first time ever, and you're on your own, especially in a city like Boston, as fun as Boston, I'm more worried about their interaction at King's Bowling Alley than I am at English 101.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Yep. I may be having some family coming onto the island in September. They're coming from Florida. What would you suggest that I do with them when they get here? Should they be tested? They're coming by plane.
Yes. So through the Nantucket Cottage Hospital, if you go to our town website, you can click on the COVID testing link, and you can sign up now to schedule a testing. So the earlier you sign up, the better. So if you schedule a date for the day they're coming in, they will only need to quarantine for the 1 day while they're waiting for their results. If it comes back negative, they're okay, and it's like they've been quarantining here on the island the whole time.
Great info. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
While we're waiting for Gary, Roberto, what is your sense of a second wave? What are you hearing? What are you studying?
Massachusetts is doing very well at trying to prevent, keeping that curve really flat. You may remember all the arguments of flatten the curve from before. As far as the second wave goes, I'm worried about that nationally. I'm not, Nantucket, we did very well when we ended up doing that lockdown, and unfortunately with the state lockdown, we locked down too. My concern for a second wave or even a full spike will be in mid to late November. And what we're running, and one of the things that you're going to see us pushing out a lot information a lot is in the coming weeks is get your flu shot, because the flu has very similar symptoms to COVID. So we're going to end up having to up all of our testing. So if somebody's showing a symptom, if they have headache, cough, and dizziness, they can show up and they're going to get the COVID swab up one nostril and the flu swab up the next nostril to figure out which one it is. And it just and a co-infection of flu and COVID can be very lethal. So we're going to be pushing out a lot of information on flu shots, and we're doing our best to order extra this year so that we can get that information out.
I would anticipate, I suspect my colleagues would as well, that you're going to have more people on island this fall than you've ever had before on a fall basis, because people are not going back to where they came from. They can work remotely and what have you. It's going to be interesting, not just in the health side, but affecting all infrastructure here on the island.
Yes. So as far as the schools go, we've already been talking to the public schools. They've only had 10 new enrollments, extra enrollments this year. Some of the private schools have seen around 8 or so each. So, but when we see that, we see about that it's at 26 or so. That comes with family as well. So that already tells us about approximately 20 to 26 families have come with children who are entering our school systems. What we're also looking to see is families that are staying on island that have kids in college, but they can commute. So they're actually going to be here in times that we didn't expect. So we will see a little bit of the strain infrastructure wise, but when the infrastructure is built for surge capacity like this weekend. This weekend is usually the most busy weekend in the year because of the Boston Pops and Opera House Cup, which was all canceled this year. Well, Boston Pops is virtual this year. So the infrastructure, the actual physical infrastructure will be able to handle the amount of people. It's actually the economic infrastructure that might actually be strained more than expected. Stop and Shop, Annie's, they and the meat and fish market might actually have to gear up in staffing and gear up in their orders this year to see a surge that they weren't expecting. So there might be a few inconveniences here and there where we all remember the toilet shortage, which that was a panic buy nationally. I would just recommend a bidet. But what we ended up happening here is, other than the national shortages that we were seeing, we were actually seeing shortages in some staples, where things like crackers were in short supply. Sometimes you would get to Stop and Shop and onions were sold out. Eggs were sold out. Things that that Stop and Shop wasn't quite expecting, because you physically needed to be here and cooking here in order to get it. So their algorithm, their ordering algorithm, couldn't keep up. So that's just a few things that we might see this fall, a few little shortages here and there. But otherwise, I think Nantucket is very well prepared infrastructure-wise to handle a growth of approximately, we'll say, up to 1,000 people or so.
Well, that brings me back to the flu shot, the seasonal flu shot. And for those of us who may be in Nantucket for the first time ever in the early fall, when do you expect them to be available? And then do you think you have the infrastructure to deliver them if your population is, 5 or 10% greater? I have no idea what the actual number will be.
So we ordered them, the hospital ordered them early this year. So they're expecting delivery of flu shots in the first week of September. Once they receive them, they will announce it, and they will be getting information out to as many people as possible. As far as getting the flu out, the shots out to everyone as we need, what we can do is, there is the department after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security required us to rewrite plans for the deployment of the Strategic National Stockpile. So if you remember the anthrax attacks, the response to anthrax is ciprofloxacin. So we had to develop plans on how to deliver a dose of Cipro to every single person on the island at any given time. So we have those plans written, and we have to plan for our maximum surge capacity. So our plans are able to get flu shots, Cipro, things like the COVID shot out to people, out to our surge. So that's about 45,000 people on our most busy weekend.
Yeah.
So we can get to the tune of about 100 people an hour is if we can really ramp it up. So we're not worried about the infrastructure, about having to get it out to people. It's the supply that we're actually worried about. That's why we ordered early.
Yeah.
And then Gary, you missed.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my computer cut out for a while, so I missed the answer to my question, how the universities seem to be able to get the results in 24 hours, and we can't. Why do they know that we don't know?
So on Nantucket, we're getting our results within 24 to 48 hours because we're using the Broad Institute, which is separate from the Quest Diagnostics group that most hospital systems are using. MGH also has their own laboratory that's been approved to do COVID tests, their own PCR reagent. So in the event that the Broad Institute gets overwhelmed, we also have access to MGH's laboratory now that the Nantucket Cottage Hospital is part of the MGH system. So we are still getting all our responses within 24 to 48 hours, which is really good. And if things really get hit and they really ramp everything up, if we see another spike, it may stretch it a little bit to about 72 hours, but we don't expect it to be more than 72 hours at any given moment because of the 2 laboratories we have in-house.
And what I see is other areas are experimenting with different types of testing. We use nasal swabs, but other areas are some are using saliva, some are using blood tests. What's the variability and what is the efficiency of some of these other systems?
So as of right now, we're using the nasopharyngeal swab that goes all the way through the back. The new testing that Broad is looking to bring out any week now is the anterior nasal swab, which only goes to the front, and that should be a rapid test that they should be able to get a response within a few hours on that one. As far as the saliva test, they're still trying to get all the efficacy on it. So you may have heard a lot of words being thrown out in the last few years about last few months about the PPV and the NPV, the positive predictive value and the negative predictive value of a test. And that tells you the sensitivity and the specificity of a type of test, of how many false positives or false negatives you get and how good it is at getting a true positive or a true negative. That's specificity and sensitivity. The saliva test, they're in the midst of that test right now. Once they get the answers on that, they will be able to roll that out. But with if you've ever worked with logistics or manufacture, you know that just because you have a product doesn't mean you can get it out to everyone. You have to ramp it up, get the product, warehouse it, and then logistically get it out to everyone. And that can be months. So that's the only thing about the saliva test that we're working on. But the Broad Institute's nasal swab, that can be done with a regular swab. So that's already logistically out there. So we're hoping to get that rolled out within the next few weeks. I was actually in a meeting with the hospital yesterday, the CEO of the hospital. So we're hoping to get that out really soon. And the saliva, as soon as that's available, we'll do that as well.
Anybody have any other questions for Alberto? Yes, Bill?
Just one. Lots of summer residents here, including us. Most, certainly including me, have absolutely no reason to think I've been exposed and living the good life. Do you recommend that such a person get a test?
It's not necessary. If you don't believe you've been exposed and you're not showing any symptoms, it's not necessary to get a test. The PCR testing, the swabs, even the saliva test, all that will tell you is if you have an active case, if you are actively fighting off the virus. The blood test is actually really good at telling you if you've ever had the virus, if you still have an antibody load. But what they're finding is those antibodies are only lasting a few months. So just like a seasonal flu vaccine, a COVID vaccine would only be good for, a certain amount of time if it responds with the same virus. So we're going to be looking into, in the future, in the next few years, possibly entering the same cycle we do with flu, where you get your flu shot and you get your COVID shot, just to make sure that it's like a booster shot.
Yeah.
But if for someone like yourself, I wouldn't recommend getting it now. It would be kind of like a loss of money.
Thank you.
Ron, you had a question?
Yes, I guess I'll call this my Cassandra question. We're told that this is the most active hurricane season on record. Are you making any preparations for the possibility that people are going to have to shelter in public places during a power outage, not necessarily because of a hurricane, but even a tropical storm that causes some serious damage?
Yes. So we have plans for that sort of disaster. We actually, the high school is our shelter, but what we also have is the high school is connected to the middle school, and then we now have the intermediate school as well that has a generator. So we've never, knock on wood, we've never had to activate more than just the high school in a storm situation, and that was actually more for a winter. It was more often for a winter storm than it is for a hurricane, because we're lucky that once it starts hitting, those, what is like the 38th parallel, things like that, the storm gets pretty weak. But if we do take a direct hit from a tropical storm, well, we will have to activate the shelter, and we do have plans for separation of individuals in the shelter to prevent spread. But we're also able to, once things are back up and running, test all the people who were in the shelter to make sure that they're not showing symptoms and get them into isolation. What I'd be more worried about, honestly, is severe scouring on the South Shore, and we'll be losing some infrastructure down there if things go, if we take a direct hit from a hurricane. Having grown up in Florida, I grew up just outside of West Palm Beach, and when Hurricane Andrew hit, I was living in Fort Lauderdale when Hurricane Andrew hit, and we definitely understand how devastating it can be if you're not prepared.
Thank you.
Roberta, last question. We spent $120 million to build a beautiful hospital. Us non-voting taxpayers footed a lot of those bills, and we're glad to do that. I was curious, they have no ICU unit on the island. And is that something they conferred with the medical department when they were putting together the plans? Because as you know, when the weather turns really sour at certain times, even the helicopters aren't and the boats aren't moving. And yet they spent all that money and is it so terribly expensive to put an ICU unit in that it just wasn't worth it?
It is actually, it would have, you said $120 million, and I think we would have added a couple percentage points to that by adding ICU. ICU is incredibly expensive to add, and the issue isn't necessarily just having the unit, is having a hospitalist able to run it. It's the staffing. ICU is incredibly specialized to the point that you would be paying a physician on staff to staff that at all times, and 90% of the time it would be empty. More than 90% of the time it would be empty. It just wasn't financially feasible to maintain ICU for an operation as small as Nantucket's. However, what they did do was when they did that shifting OR unit, they do have a few rooms in the OR that can stabilize somebody in an ICU-like situation until they can transfer them off. So there are some ventilators. We do have a heart-lung machine here, that sort of situation, so that they can keep somebody in stasis as needed until they can hold them until they can get them to an ICU.
Great.
The equipment is available, but it's in very short supply.
Well, I don't see any other questions. I want to tell you that we all believe that you have been doing a fabulous job. The proof is that the island is still relatively unscathed by the worst hotspots. And even though we have our visitors coming from all over, I'm always shocked to see how many people from California are coming here, to say nothing of Florida and some of the other places that are currently hotspots. And yet, so far, so good. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed. And we all thank you for your great service to this island. And thank you for spending the time with us this morning. You're welcome to stay with us if you'd like. We're going to talk about other business, or you can go and tend to some of your other responsibilities. But we thank you again.
No, thank you. I actually have to go inspect the farmers market.
Great. Okay.
So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And please feel free to contact me if you need anything. We are here for you. We are civil servants after all.
Thank you again.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
So the next item of business, Peter Kahn had a suggestion about a resolution. You know, we lost the spouse of one of our more esteemed members, and Peter made a suggestion that we, the committee, ought to provide a resolution of condolence for Bill Sherman in view of his loss. So, Peter?
Yes, I'd like to propose a resolution of condolence to our longtime member and secretary, Bill Sherman, on the recent passing of his wife, Jean, at the age of 91 after 69 years of marriage. Jean Sherman was a remarkable woman. I encourage you to read her obituary that appeared in the Inky Mirror on July 30th. Her life accomplishments should serve as an inspiration to all of us. So I would move that resolution, a resolution in that, to that effect.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Raise your hands. Yes. Lou, you're in favor, of course. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the next thing that we ought to talk about, you know, maybe Kathy could do a little screen sharing. We have a long list of items, and I thought we ought to take a look at that list of items that are possible subjects for the future, and chat a little bit about what we think should come off that list, and maybe what we ought to focus on for the future. In the meantime, let's just remind you, Kathy and I can remind you that our current schedule is that our next meeting is 2 weeks off, and our speaker then will be, who's our speaker then, Kathy? That's from the DPW?
From the DPW, I'll have to go look at his name, but he responded.
Yes.
And that he
We
would-
originally had Rob McNeil to speak with us. This week he sent a note to Kathy and he said, unfortunately, something has come up and he won't be able to be there, but he would be delighted to offer us his deputy. And Kathy and I talked about it and said, that's fine. We will be glad to talk to a deputy. So the deputy head of the DPW will be our speaker at the next meeting. And he sent a note to Kathy already asking whether there were certain subjects that we would like him to discuss with us. So if you have some thoughts about it either now, you can mention it now. What would we like to hear from the DPW? And if you don't have any current thoughts now, questions, please send them into Kathy, so we'll send them all. Yes, Rob? Ronald?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have another commitment, so I'm going to have to leave the meeting. I didn't want to do it unceremoniously.
Okay.
This, and thank you for having me.
So thank you for participating. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So the question is, what do we want to talk to the DPW about when they're here? I mean, we probably should make sure that, think about what kind of work they're doing with respect to storm surge and dealing with the coming changes that our climate is bringing to us. Do we have, the drainage system in place now for the town that will suffice for the next few years, or are they currently working actively to upgrade it? Those are the kind of thoughts perhaps we could ask him about.
Yeah, I think that one other thing that they've talked about before to both the town group and I think this group when last somebody came is, I'm missing the technical term, but it's incursions or intrusions into the rights of way, because we have all of these private roads that are actually public rights of way throughout the island. I happen to live on one. And what often happens at the end properties where the road runs into a major road like Cliff Road or Westchester Street is that those corners tend to not be tended very well. And the people don't landscape and cut back. And so you have no vision up or down the main road when you're trying to enter it from a side road. And in the past, the DPW has been very good at coming in and solving that problem by sending a crew in and just cleaning this up. Now, I think this is something that those property owners on the corners ought to be doing themselves, but quite often it's difficult, if not impossible, to get them to do that. And I'm hoping that they will continue to do that. And so I would pose that question to the deputy who will visit with us.
Gary, I would, that's Peter, I would, I have a somewhat mundane issue, but I've noticed, and particularly in my neighborhood, but I'm sure it's all over the island, many more streetlights out this year. And an increase in trash that's just sort of, just scattered along the side of the road off the bike paths. I'd just be curious to know what DPW does. Do they have a regular schedule to check on street lights, for example, and to sort of observe? Do they have, do they have a every schedule? Let's put it that way. Also of cleanup generally around the island.
Yeah, one of the questions that we might ask is when some of the lights go out on the poles, are they National Grid's responsibility or are they DPW's responsibility?
Right, good question.
We ought to find out from that. And by the way, Peter, I agree with your observation that we've noticed much more debris and garbage on the side of the road these days, on the streets. It seems like there's less diligence than in the past, and I don't know if that's a sign of the changes in the employee population during the pandemic or what, but
yeah, one thing, Gary, that struck me, maybe, I don't know, it could be, in years past, they've always had these summer weekends, cleanup weekends, whatever. And maybe with COVID, they don't have that. I don't know, but it's certainly.
Started.
That's true. They just started it up. They were not allowed to do it.
Right.
And
the
now
green,
they started back.
what do you call it? The green team or the
Clean team.
The clean team, yeah.
There were
And
people
the DPW picks up all the trash bags, from these folks, and they count it. And it's actually an island-wide event that's happening this week through tomorrow, where people just go out. There's an app to download and go out and you just report back in how many bags. So they're going to count how much stuff was picked up, but it's not done by the DPW. They just empty the trash cans.
So I'm glad Kathy put up on the screen now. You see, this is our typical laundry list. And there's a couple of items I think I'd like to talk with you folks about and get your views. For instance, at my request, Kathy sent out the Act Now's paper on short-term rentals. Okay, and it's very interesting. I'm on the list, the Act Now list, and that white paper that was sent out about short-term rentals is only one of a whole number of pieces of writings that Act Now has sent out on this whole short-term rental issue. They are really pounding away. They think it's obvious that one of their priorities, or at least one of their focuses at Act Now, is to stop or limit short-term rentals, because what that white paper says is that as a result of all of the short-term rentals that are occurring, a lot of seasonal, of year-round home stock is no longer available. And that has caused problems for residents on the island who are looking for reasonable rentals year-round, but because of the a great amount of money that can be earned by people with these short-term rentals, these year-round renters are unable to find places to live. Now, so we have on our, right in the middle there, it says, possible recommendations to select board rate licensing inspection of short-term seasonal vacation home rentals. It's a very small piece of that. They, Act Now is worried about that. The question is this really an issue that we care about it? Sure. Thinking about what our constituency is that an issue for us? I mean, if Act Now wants to focus on that, yes, Peter, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it certainly affects quality of life here, and so I think to that extent it is important. I happen to, I mean, I read the report. I thought it was excellent. I'd like to see us have the Act Now people in general. I mean, I'd like to have them in and tell us what they're doing generally, and see what, because I do think there would be areas of overlap of interest generally. So I think that would be worth having on our list.
Okay, and of course, Act Now is, I guess they represent themselves as representing both full-time residents and seasonal residents. So we can certainly give that some thought, which reminds me of another question that we talked about last time, which I think makes sense, and that is, should we start thinking about having two speakers at these meetings? You know, Roberto talked to us for about an hour, and that gives us time now to chat about some of these other things. But, you know, at the last meeting, I liked the fact that we had, you know, Tucker talk about one issue, and then Vince talked about coastal resiliency, and then Tucker talked about town government. Do you folks think, and so one of the thoughts that I had is that we might well invite a second speaker to some of our meetings, and just, we could tell them in advance, we have two speakers. The first one will be the first hour. So if you want, you can join for the whole meeting, but you might not want to join us until the second hour. Do you folks think it's a good idea? Bill, what do you think?
Oh, I absolutely think it's a great idea.
Okay, anybody else?
I'd also say, Gary, that I think Peter Kahn's suggestion to get the Act Now people in here is good, but they're a pretty mysterious group. When they first started, there's a lot of pushback to their anonymity. So today it's good to bring them out in the sun.
Okay, Peter.
Gary, I guess it would be helpful to know, and just for our own planning purposes, maybe everybody else knows and I don't, you know, how long our meetings are supposed to last. I mean, over the course of the few years I've been on it, they varied in time. If we can have a set time, that will help know, you know, us plan for, you know, how many speakers we want and how much time we want to leave for our own discussion. So,
Hour and a half.
well, if it's only an hour and a half, then obviously we need to shorten up the amount of time we give to the speaker.
Right.
I would say 2 hours.
Yeah, I always like to block off 2 hours and say the meeting will be no more than 2 hours. It might be an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 3/4, but it would never be more than 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
And I have other committees that I'm on that have that same format, you know. Mm-hmm. We know it'll probably be at least an hour. It might be an hour and a half. Sometimes we get into something. So with respect to that particular item on the list right in the middle, that's a very targeted piece of the short-term rental issue, which is whether or not there has to be inspection, you know, of the units. It's much, the broader issue is whether there should be
Right.
kind of flexibility. And I think that the town, and I think a lot of the residents, I know a lot of residents rent their own homes for short-term periods. And in addition to that, there are, besides the residents that rent their homes for short periods, there are many people who invest in the island, and they buy properties solely for the purpose of renting them out. And since they're trying to maximize their revenue, they're not buying them and setting up seasonal rent, year-round rentals, because they won't maximize what they receive from it. So that's two different really groups. The people that are investing just for short-term rentals, as opposed to the people who have homes and just rent it out occasionally just to supplement the income that they receive during the course of the year.
I would broaden out the scope of the discussion from, to include just about everything that's in that report.
I mean, the report includes both, but I think that they should not at all be, have, the same stroke. I mean, setting up an entire infrastructure, then do inspections and all of the, costs of that and so forth. I think that should be applied to those people who are abusing the system by setting up basically a business. In other words, if you're investing in property just to make money off the rentals, that's a business. If it's your home and you rent it for a few weeks, no, you shouldn't have it. You shouldn't have to be inspected or be under the same rules as the folks who are doing the business and who are impacting the housing. I mean, there's no impact to the housing for people who rent their own homes for a few weeks. There is an impact on housing for people who buy up a house or whatever and use it just for that purpose. That's, I think, what the target should be.
If we're going to get into this issue, there are a lot of different avenues that we're going to have to go down. The number of people that have made a second apartment in their basement and rent that apartment out during the summer months, making it illegal because they're in a zone where they're not supposed to be doing that. There are no inspections that are being done on that second apartment. Are there adequate ways to get in and out of that second apartment? Those are some of the problems that we've had on the island for years because there's a lack of summer housing for people that work here. So realize that you're just touching the tip of the iceberg when you start to look at what's happening with people renting houses on Nantucket. There's zoning issues that are being not being adhered to. Do people need a rooming house permit to rent a room out in their house to an individual that's not a member of their home? All those issues can take up the rest of the summer if we wanted to get into that issue.
Yeah, I tend to agree that before I would get into that issue at all, I'd want to know whether there's a series of problems that have occurred that require somebody to take a look. The example of the illegal rental of a basement apartment, I don't think even is part of this issue because it's already illegal. And so what are we going to do? Inspect illegal apartments to see whether they comply with the law? They don't, by definition. But I just don't think that, at least I've not heard that renters come and are, find places not to be in good condition, because my sense is this is somewhat self-regulating in that the rental agencies on the island kind of scope things out, and they typically don't want to be renting things that they're just going to get complaints about because it gums up their business model.
Right.
Well, so I guess we'll have to figure out if there's a time that we should have the Act Now people talk to us about that. But I'm looking at that list that Kathy has up on the board. I'm trying to figure out what we can take off the list. And if you look down about 2/3 down, just to reduce the list a little bit, we have something called funding of transportation upgrades, Should we just take that off the list? You know, last year, we had the Mike Burns talk with us. He was the, what was he, head of roads or something like that? He has left the island, unfortunately, and they haven't replaced him. But so an item like that,
Yeah. I think that was,
take that off.
I think that was somebody's concern about the quality of the buses.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, we asked Libby about that already, so we can take that off the list maybe.
Right.
The affordable housing, we had that done already. Tucker talked to us about the use of the $20 million, so we can probably take that off the list. The next one, I think we should take off the list, but I don't know what you folks think. What, you know, what's going on Old South Road with the Surfside Crossing 40B project?
Yes.
You know, they're fighting, they're killing each other, the town and the residents that hate it and the people that want it, that think it's good or bad. I'm not sure that's an issue that we, as the representative of all the non-voting taxpayers, ought to be diving into. There's enough focus on that, whether it happens or not, that I don't think it's something we ought to be spending our time on. You folks agree with me or disagree with me?
I'd like to just get an update as to what's happening on it, but I don't know if it's necessary to devote a whole meeting to the project itself. I don't know if there's anyone out there that can kind of give us an update as to where it is.
No, it's in the hands of the courts now, you know.
We're safe. They won't do anything for 6 months to 10 years.
That's right. That's right. So we can take that off the list. Next one is the proposed LA power line from in-town power station to Milestone Rotary. Is that something we are going to focus on in the future?
Not likely.
Yeah, so let's take that off the list. What else should we take off the list here? With respect to the question about how long we will be able to meet, you know, we talked to Libby about that a little bit, and I've heard her talk about that. We are hoping that this experience during this pandemic, which permits us to hold these meetings by computer, you know, these virtual meetings, will be something that becomes acceptable. And at the last meeting of the select board, there was a brief reference to it that was made by Libby Gibson because the question came up, and they talked about the fact that, you know, someone needs to be thinking about whether the state of Massachusetts realizes that it's a good thing to permit virtual participation in these meetings instead of requiring physically. And it may be something that comes out of all of our experience with the pandemic. If the pandemic continues, if we are probably facing a situation without a vaccine until December, or even later, I think that these virtual rules will continue, and there should be no reason why we as a committee will not continue meeting, whether we want to meet every 2 weeks or once a month or twice a month or whatever we want to do. But I assume that all the rest of the town meetings will be permitted to be held virtually, and therefore we probably would have that ability to do it as well. And that would give us a little bit more opportunity to discuss how we might feel about some of the resolutions that the town is considering. Now this year, I think you may have heard the decision made. It was re-announced at the select board meeting Wednesday. They are not having an annual town meeting in the fall. So I don't know if this is bait and switch or what. What happened was in the spring or at the beginning of this problem, the pandemic, they decided to limit the amount of items that would be voted on by the public at the ballot, and they had to go to June 30. They had to get the town budget for the next year approved. But a lot of the items that are approved at the ballot time have to be approved by an annual town meeting. And so what they said is, let's take most of the items off. So they took off 2/3 of the items, all the private warrants. People want to change this, change that. And they told everyone that they would be allowed to present those at the annual town meeting that they're going to have. They're going to move it to the fall. And so the only stuff that they really wanted to do, they stuck on that agenda prior to June 30. They had the meeting. Very few people showed up. They had it in a high school. Very few people showed up, and they approved whatever they wanted to approve. They got the budget done. And then some of the stuff, even though it was approved at the meeting, needed to get a vote by the annual town meeting to get the funding done. And they said they'd have that meeting this fall. The town has since decided, town management has decided, we're not going to do that. It's too difficult to try to figure out how to get people safely in the high school or in the adjoining schools to vote. So there is no actual town, so there's no ATM this year. There's no town meeting. And all of those items that need the secondary approval won't be happening until at least the fall. So even if we continue to have our meetings this fall, it's not as if we're going to pass on warrant issues that are coming up for a vote in October, because it doesn't sound like there's going to be anything until the spring.
May I interject something?
Yeah.
I would think that it would be wise that we continue to meet as we are now through the fall. Once it looks like we're going to have a vaccine that is going to be put into use, and we may start going back to what was more a normal process, that we then ask the select people to send a letter to our representatives at the State House, asking them to tweak the law to allow us to continue to meet like this during the winter months. I think we're rather unique, and I think there may be other groups that may want to do the same thing for 12 months out of the year instead of just for 2.5 months.
I like that idea.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and my only suggestion would be that we might cut it back from every 2 weeks to either every 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep.
Post.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we should do up a resolution, I guess, to give to the select board along that line.
Okay, if someone wants to take that project, Peter Hale, do you want to do it?
I'll do a first draft, and I
Okay.
can either circulate it to you or circulate it to everybody, or whatever. It's certainly we could perhaps do up a draft resolution and discuss it further at the next meeting.
Okay,
And maybe that's the way to go.
okay,
second
that's
the
a good
motion.
idea.
I second the motion, and we get Peter Halle to do it.
You have full authority.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. So I think that that's all we need to talk about today, I guess. I put down on the list there, there's an assistant town manager, Rachel Day, that some of you may have seen on some of these meetings. She seems extremely bright. And she's been put in charge of this town's new initiative on diversity and inclusion. And I was thinking that, it might be fun to have her come to be maybe a second speaker at one of our meetings. I'd like to.
Good idea. Good idea.
She's leading the town's effort to hire a person to be in charge of inclusion and diversity. And by the way, she also has some relationship with our island home, whether she supervises it or not. And I keep trying to figure out why the town keeps agreeing on a $5 million override for this facility, which is the only one in the state that, we're the only municipality in the state that runs a nursing home for seniors. So she could talk to us about that as well.
Could you take a moment and tell the members about the fact that our last resolution was submitted and how it was dealt with?
Yes. Yes. The good news is, with your help, we approved that resolution at the last meeting. I made sure it got to the members of the select board as promptly as we could. So, and I knew they were meeting last Wednesday. So it was plopped on their desks either Friday or Monday so that they would have it. And the good news is that when the subject came up at the select board meeting, instead of the wrangling and torture that they spent a half hour at the last meeting focusing whether we should do it or not, and the town engineer said there was some issues here, the thing went breezing through in about 4 minutes. They said, no, it sounds good to me. The proposal sounds good to me. During the interim, besides our initiative, our resolution, there was an opportunity for the town engineer, who had brought up a lot of these tiny little nits and gnats that were scaring the select board. The Coastal Resiliency Committee, on which I am a member, met, and this fellow was at the meeting. The engineer was at the meeting, and we beat him up a little bit, but I mean, basically we said, you know, this is what we really think is very important for the island. And he said, well, I'm for the island too. Is it good? So, you know, let's make sure we have reasonable processes in place to get people focusing on doing something about rising tides and storm surges. And, you know, he finally agreed. I made the comment that at that meeting that I think everyone took a lesson from, which is I said, you know, perfect is the enemy of the good. It's not going to be perfect, but we want people to stop focusing on it. And anyway, the good news is at the select board meeting, after 4 minutes of conversation, they said, sounds good, resolution's fine, and they approved it. And I happen to think that the fact that they had that nice piece of paper from us, which summarized briefly the fact that the town really ought to get its act together and start putting something in place, even if it doesn't have a lot of teeth, and even if it's only an interim solution, better than nothing. And so it would pass briefly. So I'm delighted that we participated in that.
Hey, Gary, what's the status of your excellent letter to Mary Ann Stanton?
You know, I sent you, a couple of the folks here, I sent a draft of, and you know, Peter Howe had one opinion. I was going to send a letter to the Inky, which would be a sly way of really trolling for new members of our committee. Peter thought that, sent me a note, and I sent him a copy of it, and he said, you know, maybe we should ask Marion Stanton to actually do that for us. So I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not sure what we ought to do. We could talk about it if you'd like. I'm not sure Marion wants to be our recruiting agent. I'm not sure she would be willing to do that.
Well, one way to find out is to send the letter to the editor. And you know, I mean, there are a lot of letters. There are a lot of letters to the editor, which are, you know, one reads and one wonders why the hell they published them. But this one, I mean, I think if we talk about what, you know, what it is we do and how important we are to the island, and that we're looking for support or new, you know, I would think they would print it. I mean, I would keep it, you know, fairly brief. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, some of these letters go on for, you know, columns. But I don't.
I was thinking, yeah, and I was thinking, you know, another suggestion we had was to invite Marion to one of our meetings.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about that because if we had her at a meeting, we wouldn't have anybody else at the meeting because nobody who is on the town payroll would want to be talking about some issue and have the editor-in-chief of the paper writing little notes about, oh, this is what they say, you know, and
Here's
they
an easy
scare them.
way to, here's an easy way to deal with that, Gary. And I
Yeah.
think that having her speak, which we long talked about doing, is an excellent idea per se for our committee. But second, if we're going to talk about enlisting her help in making members of the community aware of our committee and the openings on it, what better way and a more flattering way to her than to invite her to come and speak to us. And if we're worried about combining that with another speaker, we just talk ahead of time and say, you know, we need to break this up and
You invite her at 11 o'clock.
yeah, exactly. We don't want to have a town speaker have to speak with Mary Ann still on the line.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we could.
Also, these are public meetings and nothing's to
Yeah,
stop
they're public.
her or the Yankee from covering
Yeah.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I'm struggling with that, so let's keep talking about it. I'll take another look at that letter that I was thinking about.
You want to circulate it, Gary, to the rest of us, or?
Okay, I will. I'll send you the letter to the editor. I'll noodle with it a little bit more.
Okay.
Then you get your views of what you think about it.
Okay.
So Gary, bottom line is we have one speaker at our next meeting. We have two speakers at the one in the beginning of September. That they're both from finance, but there'll be two people there. We don't have any more meetings scheduled after that.
Let's
That's
get
right.
the police chief and the fire chief. Those are good ideas. I think, you know, not necessarily together, but we could,
Right.
you know, those would fill some slots.
Good suggestions.
And there's Rachel Day, as you say. Rachel Day would be a good one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wonder if I might either Kathy or I might ask Erica how the town would feel if we start scheduling meetings, you know, well into the fall after Labor Day, after our last meeting, that's usually our last meeting, but thinking about what we've been talking about, there may be no reason to not schedule that next meeting and then maybe line up whether it's police chief or somebody else to talk to us. So I think we should have that conversation with the administration, like Erica, to find out from whether they're comfortable with us starting to schedule these meetings well into the fall.
And just so you know, Gary, we almost got in trouble for not posting the agenda on time. Although the regulations say 48 hours before the meeting, that's not really what it means. They don't count Saturday. So it has to be 48 hours before Friday. And then apparently she only posts twice a day, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. So we basically would need to have things done by 10 o'clock on, I think,
Wednesday.
Which I sent it to her Tuesday night, but apparently that was not. So she gave me the whole rule. So we have to have it a little earlier than we thought.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
So basically, we're not going to try to add anybody to our next meeting at this point. We need to decide
Well,
that.
I'm still thinking whether we should try to get Rachel Day for the second hour.
Okay.
I'm for it.
You know, okay.
Why not? Why not?
Let's try to do that.
I don't know if we should ask if we can continue after Labor Day having meetings. I
Why?
think we should just do it.
Oh, okay.
We should just continue, and when it looks like that things are going to get back to normal, like I said earlier, we should request that we're allowed to continue to do this type of meeting even when we're off the island.
Well, yeah. Is there anything in our charter which limits? I haven't looked at it in a long time. That limits that limits us to the summer. Because if not, I would agree with Lou. I mean, no reason to ask if
To my knowledge, when we started this board, to my knowledge, we were never limited as to when we could meet or how often we could meet. The only problem that we had is that most of the members are not here during the winter months.
right.
That's
Now
right.
we have a system where we can meet all year round.
Right.
I
And so
think you're right, Lou. You know,
I mean,
right.
the governor's order is still in place, so
Right.
until you hear that it's not,
Exactly.
The
Okay.
one problem that we had earlier this year, after the governor's order was in place for, what, 2 months perhaps, was that the person I think you've been dealing with on posting was not permitted to post the meeting for us until she was told she could. And so when we were trying to, meet in advance of the town meeting, which eventually was delayed, we were not able to because we couldn't get a meeting posted.
most of that was because they wanted us to use their Zoom system and they hadn't had time to set it up.
Yeah.
All right.
That was the reason.
Yeah.
Well, and the question is, assuming we're going to continue meeting, we can only meet under the governor's order with continuing to use the town's Zoom system.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
It's in
we
place.
can just assume that we'll be able to continue to use it in September and October.
So the question is whether somebody should actually informally maybe talk to Libby or whomever the person is who could become the choke point and say, this is what we're planning to do when you already have things scheduled to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we assume there's no problem with scheduling meeting through the town Zoom
Yeah.
system in September and October.
Yeah.
Just assume it's okay, and let's check with them.
But I
Instead of
think we
asking.
could also separately work on what was discussed before, a resolution or some action for the day that the pandemic is at an end and Zoom is not the preferred meeting method.
Right,
Have that, the law changed to allow
Right.
it in our situation.
right. Somebody, and you're working on that resolution or
Yeah.
something, yeah, okay. Okay. All right,
I'll put a motion to adjourn on the table if.
okay, a second, yeah, I think, thank you all for staying for the extra.
right.
little
Next
time.
meeting is, can we just have the next meeting date, please?
The 22nd,
Okay, thank you.
2 weeks from today, at the same 10 o'clock, and we have the deputy for DPW and maybe Rachel Day.
Right,
Good. Have a good 2 weeks, everyone.
Thank you.
motion.
Thanks
Is there
a
a
lot.
second to that motion?
No, second. Oh, I can.
All in favor?
Aye.
Done. Have a safe time, folks. Stay well.
Thanks a lot, Lou. Gary. Bye-bye.
Right, bye-bye.
Aye.